morning and welcome back to the lecture series on tribal studies in India, interdisciplinary perspectives and approaches. So, in continuation from my previous lecture, today I am going to discuss the problems of categories and categorizations and classifications associated with tribes. So, we were talking about the tribes being an identification as opposed to devising their own definition, their own all-encompassing definition as a category. The tribal studies as a scholarship and discourse has still to achieve this kind of definition. It falls short in terms of giving a closure or a finalized definition to who a tribal person is. Colonial anthropology and anthropological and sociological literature from the 1920s and 1930s, basically from the earlier part of 20th century. We see these anthropological and sociological exploits have consistently tried to freeze the notion of tribes in time and space on account of certain features. They have been consistently seen, and very problematically so, as a static, homogeneous and undifferentiated social category. So, when we talk about the tribal person, there are certain stereotypes that immediately come to mind, which defies variations or metamorphosis or mutations across time and space, that in a way ossifies the meaning of tribes or tribals. We have also discussed how even in the post-colonial period such practices, such perspectives and ways of thinking have remained dominant, and they have been continued by the scholars and administrators alike. And in fact, such perspectives, such a way of understanding the tribes as frozen in time and space has been the common lens or the chief lens adopted by the state as well. However, in the contemporary times, scholars have questioned the notion of tribe as a homogeneous and undifferentiated category, and they have even pointed out the significant differentiation within the tribal groups. So, when we say that tribals are a homogeneous people, it is tantamount to bulldozing of, it is tantamount to kind of flattening the specific distinct histories, lineages and accounts of struggles and developments that each group has had. In post-colonial India, tribes have been officially defined since at least the 1960s, and there have been certain major features associated with the category of tribes. One being the primitive traits, then their distinctive culture, geographical isolation, shyness of contact with outsiders and their backwardness. So, like I have been iterating in my previous lecture also, tribes have been associated with certain features, these features being their specific culture that the larger Indian society sometimes, many a times cannot associate with or identify with, their geographical isolation, their lack of readiness to contact with the non-tribals or the outsiders, and then their backwardness. They have been largely perceived as backward people. Scholars argue that the tribe in India have always been a politico-administrative category and had hardly any socio-cultural or economic dimension of their own. Tribes have been largely conceptualized based on detailed ethnographic accounts, where major emphasis was laid on factors such as kinship, social organization and their religious practices or spiritual values. The most important feature of such understandings of tribes was that they perceived these studies, these scholarly interventions perceived the tribes as a distinct social category as compared to other social groups in the country, right. So, rather than a purely academic interest, it involved a certain politicized set of mind, where in the long run such interventions, such scholarly interventions, such studies would not advantage, would not benefit the subjects of these studies, the tribals themselves. They would disadvantage the subjects, the tribals. The category of tribes in the post-colonial period was considered to have fixed and permanent traits. And these, what were these traits? None of them were very good. The key traits associated with the tribals would be aboriginal, primitive, displaying features of isolation, backwardness, etc., as decided by the state. Such definition would tend to dehumanize rather than trying to understand the tribes. The comparison would be in terms of certain standard features, certain parameters that were possessed by the non-tribals. So, the tribals would be pretty much compared and judged in terms of the features and characteristics possessed by the non-tribals. So, these studies would define the tribes as historically and culturally unchanging categories, and the question of exploitation and social conflict would not be discussed so much. So, Indian anthropologists depicted the tribes as small, self-contained, self-sufficient and autonomous communities that were practicing subsistence economy within their limited trade, within their limited scope and geographical space. The Indian constitution ignored the differentiation among tribes, the heterogeneity, the very many variety of groups, the hundreds of varieties of languages and practices and spiritual beliefs and lineages, right. All their peculiarities, all their specificities would be flattened when there would be just one sweeping term, tribe, encompassing them all in a very ambiguous fashion. The economic and political exploitation of the tribals also remained understated, under-researched and under-discussed till a very recent time. Over the years, we see that there has been a gradual emergence of differentiation within the tribal society and also the growth of class relations within tribes. In fact, within the apparent homogeneous society of tribes, that they are largely perceived as, they are seen as a homogeneous group, but in reality, if we study them in depth, we would know that not all members have equal access to the state resources and benefits, the new policies that tend to extend certain benefits or advantages to the tribal groups are not accessed or are not enjoyed by all the tribals, all the members of a given tribe equally. Some have greater access to these resources such as employment, education, small startups and so forth, whereas others do not. So, within this category called tribe, we certainly see new gradations coming in terms of class formation. Here critic Jagannath Pathi argues that a large number of Indian anthropologists tried to portray the non-existence of differentiation among tribals. So, this is a very romanticized understanding that the tribals are an egalitarian society. To begin with, of course, yes, that is what the tribal values teach, egalitarianism, and because there is no caste practice, equality to begin with. But then that equality does not remain the same across time and space. With travel in time, we see that with progress of time, we see that new policies that are benefiting these groups are enjoyed only by a select few and not by everyone. So, such myth of homogeneity that has been generated by early Indian anthropologists can be questioned. So, when we have such scholarship that talks about this myth of homogeneity, it becomes a reason for the scholars to not see the development of class gradations, class relations among the tribals within the tribal societies. So, tribal communities had developed class forces within themselves, and this has become a more pronounced reality with progress of time, depending primarily on the nature of growing private landholding and to a certain extent through the sanction of their tradition and special privileges that are granted by the state. So, we see that when external factors come and affect a self-sufficient cosmos or ecosystem, there are certain factors such as private landholding and then benefits of education and employment. All these special privileges that are external to their intrinsic social values, when these things are being introduced, they are not being accessed squarely and symmetrically by all the members from the community. Scholars have argued that tribals have been internally differentiated with respect to land, the rate of exploitation of labor as well as in terms of income, which structures them in terms of class gradation. Tribes were actually as class ridden as the rest of the Indian society. So, this myth of homogeneity is slowly going away and this however, this gradation becomes more amplified as there are newer and newer policies, and there is no way of ensuring that these policies, these welfareist policies penetrate the tribal regions in a more effective fashion. As long as they reach only the influential sections of the tribal communities, they remain arrested or limited to select hands, to select few privileged tribal sections. In certain cases of investigation of the actual beneficiaries of tribal welfare programs, it has been found, like I was saying just now, it has been found that approximately a very tiny population, a very thin population among the tribals have benefited within the group, and even within that it was usually the landlords and the rich peasants who benefited more than those for whom those policies were meant. So, here I would like to say that the situation is very much comparable with that of the upper class Dalit sections, who have historically played as a liaison between the so called mainstream or upper caste or socially dominant groups and their own brethren, their own tribal people who belong to the more disadvantaged sections of the society, who are socio-economically not so exposed. So, we see that the upper class from the tribal or the Dalit groups play as a liaison, as a bridge between the socially prominent groups and their poorer counterparts, their socio-economically poorer counterparts. And there has been a marked tendency to espouse the values of the mainstream. So, there has been rampant Christianization and Hinduization among the tribes and also among the Dalits. So, they look down upon their own poorer counterparts and they do not work so much as they should have to bring up this section of the society. Their perspectives, their self-perception is now developed in terms of the mainstream values. So, they are mainstreamed, this is a term that is used, right. Sometimes in the case of the Dalits, it is said that they have adopted they have been Brahminized, they have been mainstreamed, and they in turn are exploiting or looking down upon their own poorer counterparts. They do not ensure that the same benefits reach the bottommost rung of the ladder. Tribes have become differentiated into categories such as rich, the middle class, the poor and further the landless, which further contributes to the emergence of a strong class gradation or class relations in these tribal societies. In this respect, we see that the notion of tribal identity has also never remained something closed and finalized. It was also open to question. What is tribal identity? A homogeneous tribal identity has been promoted by the upper class tribals only to the extent of making broad and generic demands such as tribal development, protective legislation, white collar jobs, higher education and so forth. At the same time, we see the class differences showing in terms of the wages that the tribals earn. I mean, there can be a huge discrepancy, a huge gap between what the richest of the tribals are earning as opposed to the landless, riot or tenant who is just staying back in the village and staying on just who just lives on mere subsistence and very mere wages. In this regard, the upper echelons of the tribal society have largely made use of similar rhetoric, this rhetoric of development, protective legislation, high education. All these rhetorics have been used by the upper echelons from the tribal society as are applied by the nation state and official bodies while navigating the policies for the betterment of the tribal communities. So, we see that the upper echelons are instrumental in pushing these policies, in materializing these policies, but they are also the main or the primary beneficiaries of these policies. These policies, the fruits of these policies or these new yojanas do not trickle down to the bottommost rung of the ladder where the help or the aid is maximum needed. So, as a way of concluding, the process of classification and categorization of tribal communities continues to be a contentious and contested issue that is deeply fraught with colonial legacies, administrative policies and sundry academic debates. So, while at different points in time tribes were seen as static, homogeneous or fixed categories, contemporary evidence and realities show otherwise. They show that there have been significant internal diversities and complexities, economic stratifications and even very asymmetrical political ambitions and mobilizations within such units. So, these units can hardly be treated as a peaceful closure or a static category or a homogeneous whole in itself. In fact, we understand that the future frameworks for tribal identities should move beyond rigid definitions and recognize the evolving nature of tribal identities, the mutating, metamorphosing nature of tribal identities as a way of ensuring inclusive policies for scheduled tribe groups, policies that do not only benefit and develop the upper echelons of the tribal society who have already been so called mainstreamed and who have already been a part of the national debates vis-a-vis tribal policies and betterments. These growth or these betterment or benefits or welfare in the fields of education and employment should touch the grassroots level. They should reach the grassroots level, and that is how the policies will be successful and they will be deemed as fruitful in the true sense of the term. So, with this I will stop my lecture here today. Let us meet with another discussion in our next lecture. Thank you.